So, Jeff, thank you very much for joining us today at MineX Kazakhstan 2019. And we're always very, very grateful to have high-level representation from SRK Consulting. I wonder if you can say a little bit about your particular area of expertise, which is mine cost closure estimates, and particularly different approaches to estimation, and what the function of each of those is, and their role, and why it's important not to get them confused.
Well, with respect to the methodologies we use, there are a number of them. Most of them have been around for a long time. They're typical things we use for doing engineer cost estimating. Things like development of first principles methods, use of contractor cost estimates, as well as actual site data, where where work has actually been done on a mine site. It's one of the best ways we can get an accurate cost estimate to do future work. We actually have three different types of cost estimates we typically discuss. The first one is really an internal cost, a life of mine cost estimate, and that's usually basically built as part of the financial model for the mine. It includes everything that's going to happen at the mine and all of the closure activities associated with all of the structures, the features, and the activities that will go on in the mine. The next cost estimate is the one we talked about here at some length, which is a financial assurance cost estimate. And this is basically the cost that the government would spend in the event of a bankruptcy, a default by a mining company. The purpose of this is to protect the government and the people of any country where mining occurs, so that if something happens and that mining company is no longer there or not able to complete the closure work, at least the people of that country are not burdened with the expense of doing that. The final cost estimate, which we briefly touched on today, is what we call an asset retirement obligation, and it's basically used for financial reporting. Mining companies listed on stock exchanges have to submit their annual reports every year, and this is basically part of the liabilities that they have to report. And the difference between this and the other types of cost estimates is it's not looking at the entire operation. It really only looks at what the financial liabilities associated with closure are at the end of the current fiscal year, the reporting fiscal year.
So you explained a little bit as well about the history of cost estimation and really the extent to which progress has been made in this area from some of the really disastrous experiences in the late 80s and early 90s, and efforts to try and improve legislation surrounding this area. So where do you what was driving that particular trajectory, first of all? And secondly, what about the instance of Kazakhstan and the developments that have been made with the new mining codes and changes that have been brought in there?
Well, on a sort of historical industry basis, a lot of the early thinking on closure and closure cost estimates, financial assurance in particular, it was very theoretical. I think we all had a rather naive belief that it would never happen to us, and so people didn't think it was all that important. Unfortunately, when the downturn in the industry in the late 1990s, early 2000s hit, a lot of people found out that particular naivete was very wrong, and as a result, a number of companies did go bankrupt, and that meant that governments were left with the responsibility to close mines that the mining company was no longer around to do. Suddenly, we all realized that this was a whole lot more important, and we did not understand it as well as we thought. It started a complete rethink on what was happening with mine closure cost estimates. The next thing that actually happened was in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, when people started realizing that this actually was an obligation for financial reporting. And during that period of time, it was very interesting that the financial reporting portion of mine closure cost estimates actually raised the game one more step, because in the the aftermath of Enron and Tyco and WorldCom, suddenly executives in mining companies realized they could be held liable if it was determined they were under-reporting liabilities. And as a result of that, suddenly the whole issue of closure cost estimating made it all the way up into the executive suite of most of these companies. And when the executives have attention on it, everybody has attention on it.
And can you say just finally a little bit about Kazakhstan, the impact you see from the changes to the mining code?
Well, Kazakhstan, actually, when I was involved in 2016 on a project funded by the World Bank to do a comparative study against other parts of the world and what other countries had done, and we evaluated the then current mining code or subsoil use code in Kazakhstan against 8 countries around the world with respect to closure, and particularly the closure financial assurance. Based on that, there were a few gaps, which is understandable. The code was older, but what the government did during that period of time is they had a very serious look at what needed to be done to bring the Kazakhstan subsoil use code up to international standards. And I think they did a very good job. Compared to what I've seen around the world, they certainly compare well with other countries that went through this process. As I said in our talk, nobody gets it perfect the first time. There will undoubtedly be changes over time in what they've done, but it's a very good start. And I think that we're already seeing the effects of that in terms of the perceived risk associated with investment in mining in Kazakhstan as documented in the most recent Mining Journal World Risk Report.
And hopefully that will translate over the coming decade into more investment.
Hopefully it will. Hopefully hopefully the investors will continue to see an improvement, and it makes them more comfortable when they know that environmental and sustainability issues, as well as things like resource and reserve reporting, are transparent and being considered in these various countries.